for. Like, we use it for PFTs to get a reaction, but also they use it in ICU when you have really high ICPs, intracranial pressures and ocular pressures. You'll see this at some point. That's the only reason I'm telling you about it. You will see that later. So, so there's three different types of hyponatremia as well. We talked about the skin, the shifts. You'll end up getting weak, lethargic, muscle cramps, anorexia, nausea, vomiting, confusion. Essentially, you can't function like you're supposed to when your sodium level drops. So generally, less than 135 is considered low, less than 130 is considered moderate, less than 120 is like a severe episode of hyponatremia. And make sure you know the normals, guys. That's going to be something that you'll definitely see on the test, is the normals. The relationship between sodium fluid is so intertwined. It's actually divided into hyponatremia, hypovolemic, euvolemic, and hypovolemic categories. So what does this word mean? Low volume. Right. What does this word mean? It's literally the amount of volume that's in the blood. And Barney showed me how to use this. Let's see if I can. Oh, yeah, we're good. The thing to note here, for the most part, I just want you to for yourself, okay? This is something good for yourself to know, to keep mindful of. So different, and I'm gonna tell you, diuresis from oncotic or diuretics can cause any of them, depending on the type of diuretic, where it works in the kidneys. But osmotic diuretics, in the one we just talked about, mannitol is an osmotic diuretic, because it literally pulls fluids out of the cells and extracellular space into the blood, takes it down here, and it follows it straight out into the bathroom. Mineral corticoid deficiency. What does that make you think of? Yeah. What's the big one we talked about? If you guys get this, I'm gonna be proud. One we talked about over and over and over last semester. We talked about that one a lot too. Aldosterone. So that's one of those. Aldosterone has a lot to do with sodium and volume. And of course, this right here, this is all, if somebody's vomiting a lot, diarrhea a lot, something like that, you'll lose a lot of sodium and a lot of water, okay? Normal water volume, but low sodium, a lot like inappropriate ADH secretion. So what is ADH? What's another fancy name for that?
I know it's a hormone, but it's
It is.
involved with
Antidiuretic hormone, right? Otherwise known as vasopressin. Okay. You guys remember what vasopressin does? I don't want to get you too far off subject.
Keeps it from drinking or something?
Yeah, it makes you retain the fluid. So that's the one that creates the aquaporins, so the water can come back into the body. I don't want to go too far into that. Malignancies, hypothyroidism. Here we go with the deficiency of glucosteroids. Polydipsia, you might know that fancy word.
Excessive thirst.
Holy cow, that's perfect. Yes, excessive thirst, so you're super thirsty. And beer, potomania. You need to quit drinking so much beer, literally. Literally. And then hypovolemic, hyponatremia, congestive heart failure, nephrotic syndrome, cirrhosis. What do those things right there have in common? They all make you swell, right? So it goes in the interstitium, you get all that fluid in there, so you end up retaining all that stuff.
So this would be something like diabetes insipidus issue.
Diabetes insipidus?
Because they have like the
Yeah, it would be.
polydipsia and then the diuresis.
Because what does that involve? Which one?
ADH.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So if you have way too much of it, you're gonna have tons of fluid on. If you don't have enough, you're gonna be dehydrated. You're gonna end up flushing it out. Diabetes insipidus. You guys heard about that? Has nothing to do with diabetes, just so you know. It's called diabetes insipidus.
insipidus.
So, and like the reasons for hypernatremia is a lot less, okay? It just means, obviously, you guys know this, hypo, it means you have too much sodium in the body. Usually it's from, eating too much sodium, generally speaking. That can increase your serum osmolarity. If you actually look, if you have high sodium in your blood, okay, can that cause high blood pressure?
Yes.
It can. And sometimes they'll give you like a water pill or something like that to help you to kind of counteract that. To be honest with you, I probably should be on one. Yeah.
Would that cause kidney stones? Too much
That's a
sodium?
good question, I don't know. If I had to answer now, I would say no, but it's a good question. I don't know. I got more research to do, things. Keep them coming. And guys, that is for real.
Oh my goodness.
You see this? I have seen that.
It really stays like that?
Yeah, you do it, I mean, to the point, you go over there and you're doing other stuff, you come back here, you go there and you push down on it to make it look better. Yeah, cause it's like, that doesn't look right, so you push it back, yeah, it can literally stay that way when you're that
Almost looks like
dehydrated.
a pain, it looks so
It
weird.
does, it does, it looks like a scar thing.
You see that a lot or just like a couple times?
Yeah, you'll see it, not a lot though.
Mm.
The docs are good at keeping that from happening,
Yeah.
but it does happen.
Because usually they give you like fluids right away,
Uh,
like when you come in, if it's
It's usually-
hydration issue.
There's always that one ER doc that says, we'll wait till they go to ICU. They come up like that. They'll be good till they get upstairs, it's okay. So, some of the causes for hyponatremia, osmotic loop diuretics can make it happen. Somebody already mentioned diabetes insipidus. Makes you pee a whole lot, okay? That has to do with your, with the ADH as well. These down right here, they either affect your ADH or your, what was the hormone we just talked about a minute ago?
Aldosterone.
Thank you. Jeez. Because here, and if you'll notice that the increased sodium, all those affect aldosterone to some degree. Because remember, when aldosterone gets cranked up, it brings the sodium in, brings the water in, and it kicks out the potassium and the hydrogens through the urine. So you end up dropping your potassium, dropping your hydrogens.
So a fistula is when it connects like one part of the body part to another or something like that?
And that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So if you think of a tracheobronchial fistula in here, so if you went down with a scope, you could, through the bronchus, when you got down here where the fistula was, you could look and actually slide through that and go into the stomach.
What fistulas happen, they just corrosion?
Wear and tear over time, different disease processes. We could even call it one. I don't think that we've ever called it one, but I have seen them, but. So here's the big competitor, right? Potassium. So they keep those two, this is the reigning champion in the cell, right? So sodium's the boss outside, potassium's the boss inside the cell. So it likes to regulate the acid-base status, insulin, catecholamines, aldosterone, everything. Now, do you guys remember what happens whenever you have elevated insulin, catecholamines, aldosterone? What happens if I have a really high hydrogen? So if you have a lot of hydrogen floating around in the blood, remember that potassium will come out and put that hydrogen into the cell. So what's that gonna do to the potassium level? It's gonna make it go up. Cause that's essentially, it's not in the cell, it's in the blood. We can't measure it in the cell. But once it goes in the blood, it's like, oh, what are you doing around here? Why are you floating around? And it could be from any of these. And you see this one right here? We can cause that. This is kind of like given, when we get excessive, bingo. Excessive albuterol and albuterol-like products, Exactly. So if you had an asthmatic or something, and you're getting a lot, that can actually make your potassium drop. Because if you end up giving them a lot, it's called, what was the name? It's like beta-2 sensitivity. The fight or flight systems becomes very sensitive to that. So it starts producing a lot of sugar, and it makes this real sensitive, so it really starts to push that potassium in or out in preparation for that. Where acidosis, insulin, aldosterone levels, just opposite, for each is the opposite scenario. Is there any questions on this one?
So catecholamines basically can change the balance of potassium.
They sure can. They sure can. And you guys remember aldosterone? Yeah. That's the dude with the kidneys. Potassium, is definitely the other part. So just as a remembrance thing, you remember when we went through the heart muscle, we were talking about the threshold potential? And then the flooring, remember the calcium calls the flooring, the potassium calls the threshold to go up or down from that. So just keep that in mind as we're moving forward talking about muscles. Make sure you know all the normals. Finally. So potassium is normally 3.55. It's very low. Why is that? Where?
You get to
Oh, because that's
your
the thing
heart.
outside that you're moving.
Yeah, very good. Because the other 98% is inside the cells. We can't really measure that. Exactly, that's why it's so low. And this is just showing you the delicious avocado, the not so delicious banana, good source of that.
Well, you a banana hater? I love bananas.
Yeah, hey, but
Oh my goodness. I don't know how I feel about you now, Carl.
if it's gonna be that way, I like ripe bananas.
You like ripe
I
bananas?
do like ripe bananas. My wife eats them green, I don't like
I like
those.
green.
I like green ones.
Yeah.
Green are better.
Can't even talk to you. I'm a
Did you know they actually have, what is that?
You eat them brown?
Oh, I can.
No.
They're green, they actually have less carbs.
I sure can.
Isn't that weird?
They turn into pure,
Yeah.
pure sugar by then.
Because they're not as
really
sweet,
do.
right?
like
Huh?
banana
The
bread.
sugar hasn't like.
Oh, it is.
Maybe.
That banana bread is delicious. Zucchini bread, all those breads are delicious. I love them.
I had a zucchini brownie once, that was good.
Oh, that does sound good.
That does sound good, actually. Well, anything with chocolate, anything.
Right.
Put some sugar in it and put it in the pan.
I found it, I went to a restaurant one time and I saw where the guy, while I worked there, he took mushrooms and they had, mold on them and he fried them. I found out that day you can fry anything and it'll taste delicious.
Mhm.
People love them.
Basically.
I didn't eat any, but. So you guys remember, potassium, remember that's the reigning champion inside the cell, right? So that has a lot to do with action potential. So when we talk about action potential, you're going to have a lot of muscle weakness, malaise, fatigue, muscle pain. Just know the symptoms of them, having too much and too low of these things. That's something you'll probably see again. And with this one, remember we was talking about the heart? There we go. There we
That's
go.
what causes the, when you have urology,
Can. You get the palpitations and dysrhythmias.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna tell you, that's something to be, just be mindful of. If you have an asthmatic, giving them a bunch, and you look at that and also like to.
So
like
they,
that.
so they're on a beta blocker. Could you give them albuterol or would you defer to like an alternative like that albuterol?
It depends on the beta blocker.
Okay.
Some of them are very specific to beta 1, then there's others that are not so specific. And if you have the not specific, you're kind of wasting your time.
How much albuterol is too much albuterol? Or is it dependent on?
Tell us.
Yeah, so, I would say I did 3 treatments, almost back to back in a span of about 3 hours, and that was too much.
That can
was
get you going.
Too much. I had like a consistent problem, and the problem was I had cats before.
Oh,
Yeah, that's what that was the issue, so, but yeah, I had really bad heart palpitations. I had, infrequency, and I was not using the bathroom at all. It was bad. I was producing like no urine whatsoever.
that's not a good song. And I'm gonna tell you what she's talking about, that's a drop in the bucket of what we do to some of these people. Kids will come in and we'll give them 10 milligrams and then 5 milligrams, 5 milligrams. Doctors will constantly draw blood, checking their potassium levels and lactic levels, make sure we're not getting out of hand. But in adults too, absolutely.
Yeah, after 3 breeding kittens, I do that was enough.
Yeah, so if you go in there and the patient's starting to act different after a few albuterol treatments, because sometimes you give them every 2 hours, just be mindful. Because sometimes you have to weigh, you know, is this worth it anymore? Contact the doctor. They're the ones who can make that decision.
So if that happens, do you just stop? And you just let her?
Well, if you're heading in that direction, you can finish the treatment generally, because it's not a fast thing, it's kind of a slow thing. And just call the doc and say, hey doc, I want to tell you, seeing some of these signs and symptoms could be associated, and the doc may say, okay, and they'll order some blood work, and then the doctor will, you know, just say, everything okay, or the doctor may change orders. Last patient I had where this happened, I talked to him, and I didn't even say anything. I said, you know what, this patient, he goes, yeah, their potassium, he said, just go ahead and change these treatments to PRN. The patient was still wheezing, but it wasn't worth it. Let the patient call for it, because I'm already gonna have to give her potassium, I'm gonna have to do this, I'm gonna have to do that. So, you know, you just stay in contact with the physician. That's always a good thing. You talk with the nurse, the doctor, everybody.
So that's like, if you have like, is that why like super ventricular tachycardia, like the comorbidity is like using albuterol and stuff like that? Or can you?
That would be a bad side effect. It usually doesn't happen. Albuterol, for the most part, goes so ionized, stays in the lung, it doesn't go anywhere. It's just when you give a lot of it.
A lot of it. I
Usually-
know like people end up developing heart problems.
That's
after.
probably disease-based.
Oh, okay.
Like with COPD, things like that, it ends up restructuring everything in your lungs. It takes an impact on your heart. It can cause pulmonary hypertension, but it can cause a lot of strain on your heart too.
Okay.
It's usually not that albuterol, but. So you guys remember this, U-waves? If you say no, I understand. It's not something we discuss much. QT, prolongation, that means your QT wave is usually like this, now it's like this, it's getting wider. T-wave changes. The T-wave changes is part of the, so your T-waves end up getting bigger, because normally like, there's one that goes boop boop. And it has to do with that action potential. Okay? Because that threshold, and when you talk about hypokalemia, is way down here. So it's taking a lot of energy to repolarize. So it goes, and the T-wave, because it's taking so long to repolarize, so the things repolarize, but you remember the very last part is the Purkinje fibers. It takes so long for it to actually generate and recuperate, because it takes so much electricity to do so, that you actually get the repolarization of the ventricles, and the U wave would be the repolarization of the very end of the Purkinje fibers, the very tips. And it's just you literally see the repolarization, then you'll see just like a little bump at the end. If you see a little bump at the end of all of them, that would be a U wave. Generally, it's not something that you see on the EKG, but you would in this case. And that's a telltale sign. So, you know, so remember, this is so important for muscle contraction. All these electrolytes are, but this one has a little bit more say-so over most of them, because of action potentials, that, calcium, and sodium, kind of the bosses in this game. So what happens is that you not only kind of lose muscle movement if it's too high or too low, but also like in your stomach, it can cause ileuses. So ileus is when so you know your stomach intestines usually does this contraction thing, send food on through? Well, no, it's not. This is painful. Very painful. Have you ever had gas that won't pass? Man, I'll tell you what. I keep finding out these things, and I remember that guy threw a sheet over his foot. He had gout. He goes, oh. I said, oh, I'm so sorry, sir. He says, I got gout. I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I was down in the ring going, then I got gout. That hurts. It's like walking on glass. I understand now. So these people, they're not overreacting. This stuff hurts. But anyway, this is something that can happen due to potassium.
So this is part of the colon, the ileus? I think, so my dad had colon cancer, I think that's where it was.
In his intestines, like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes with the ileus, they have to put in that thing.
That's
where
what he
the-
had.
Yes. Sometimes you have to do that.
Mhm.
Sometimes they can remove it to fix it, but hopefully they put it in for a while, but not forever. They can reverse them too.
Yeah, he was they were able to connect with the sphincter or whatever. This was at Duke, and they're a wonderful hospital.
They are, Duke is pretty awesome.
Yeah, so he didn't have to have that for the rest of his life.
Can you imagine walking around that? Oh,
It sucks.
that little bag, and it's in there, you can imagine how embarrassing that is for them and stuff too.
Mhm.
You know, you walk in, you act like you don't see it, but they're already embarrassed, it's unfortunate. But it's better to save your life, right? So potassium levels above, hyporeflexia, muscle weakness, paralysis, and this just goes back to everything we were talking about. If this electrolyte is out of whack either way, this is essentially what you're gonna do. Your muscles are not gonna act appropriately. On the EKG, you get peak T waves, a wide QRS, and I think it's the next slide. And I would make sure I remember that elevated serum potassium levels are frequently encountered in patients with renal disease or failure. I would make sure I remember that. That's something really good to know. You know why? Because every patient that comes in the hospital has a stamp plate, and one of them is kidney disease. They all have it. And this would be a good reason as to why they have hyperkalemia. So as you can see on this right here, you walk in, you see, look how big that T wave is. You guys remember it's supposed to be little, but now it's huge. Because it takes that much electricity to get them to repolarize, because that action potential is just up here, or down here. It's way off where it should be. And that's with 5.5 to 6.5. Okay? So moderate would be 6.5 to 8. Now look at the widening of the QRS. So when you see a widening of that, what does that mean for the heart? What's actually going the heart make that? Because this measures electricity. So that means electricity is what? Slowing way down. Do you see a P wave? Remember, when that P wave is activated, it sends a massive charge throughout the heart. But without the P wave, it sends the charge, build. So everything is slowed down a lot. Okay? There's no more P wave, it's gone. Now look at this one. It's almost like a sine. That's when it gets real high above 8.
Is that when like you have something like a heart failure?
Yeah, well, you're borderline deaf. This could easily turn into death. So it's almost like you took a string, made an M with it, and you're pulling it slowly like this. You don't remember like that. I have seen people with 10 and 12. How do you fix it?
Bunch it off anyway.
You're not wrong. Usually we get called to give 10 milligrams real quick. That ain't gonna touch this. So how do you get rid of potassium? Yeah, that's gonna take too long, isn't it? So you remember we talked about action potentials with potassium and also the threshold being set by calcium? Let's give some calcium gluconate. That's gonna help balance this. It's gonna bring them both in line. It's like solving 2 problems with 1 stone. It's beautiful. But that's not gonna fix this. You could get rid of some of the sweating. They have a stuff that makes you poop it out. Calculate, I can't remember the name of it. That's gonna take 24 hours. These guys go into dialysis. This is remember how do they kill people? Whenever they kill them because of the state laws, big old huge dose of potassium, right? It makes you do this and it kills you. Well, they're in there. We're getting EKGs constantly. We got them on the rhythm. And I was like, cannulate this patient quickly. They put them in their room. They pushing you out the way to get those cannulated because they need to get the potassium down. But the only way to truly get rid of potassium quickly is through dialysis. It is this is very dangerous. And just kind of keep this in your mind, some of the causes for both of them. We're not gonna go through all of these, we don't even have time, but just keep in mind some of the causes for hypokalemia, vomiting, caloric obstruction, diarrhea. Diuretics can, mostly thiazides. That's the particular diuretic can have a big shift on that. Beta-2 agonists, that's us. We can have effect on that because we push it back into the cell, more or less, so it drops in the blood. Malnutrition. To be honest with you, how do we get potassium in our body? That's about the only way too, isn't it? Either eating or our body doesn't produce potassium. It can only use what it's got. Some of the causes for, higher ones, blood transfusions, potassium sparing diuretics, that's usually probably the number one cause for high potassium is potassium sparing. You guys remember that, spironolactone and all those? Because that, literally, this, in so many words, this blocks aldosterone. So you remember aldosterone makes you dump potassium? This will keep you from dumping it. This will make you retain it. Angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. So that stops angiotensin 2 from occurring. Renal failure, I would know that one for sure. And you see aldosterone deficiencies. I mean, they're kind of in a nutshell. They all affect your aldosterone levels. Just be familiar with those. Any questions on these? And just, you don't have to know them in depth, just know that these can cause them. So chloride. So when it comes to the blood, guess who the reigning champion is for anions in the blood? Chloride. So be mindful of what I just said. You probably hear that again. So sodium is the reigning what? Cation, right? That's on the outside. Chloride is the reigning anion on the outside, negatively charged. It's the most common cation, anion, in the extracellular space and changes in serum. Chloride usually follows changes in serum sodium. Because you remember those two kind of move together. It's like, sodium's like, you know what? I'm gonna stay here. Where chloride's like, you know what? There's too much negativity. I'm gonna come over there, or there's too much positivity. I'm gonna come over there with you. So it kind of follows the sodium, because remember the sodium is the champion. So wherever the sodium goes, the chloride has a tendency to keep the balance with the sodium everywhere it goes. A lot of times people will take blood samples to determine sodiums, chlorides, and many other things. They also take urine samples. So you can see there the normal for blood. That's probably more important to know for what we generally take care of. It's good to know also normal levels for urine as well. The halides, it's not much of a concern. There's 4 of them. If you look on the periodic table, they end in INE. Bromine, iodine, and chlorine and fluorine. Anyway, any of those will be measured as this as well, but that's not really something I've ran across in all my years. You can see bromide right here. It's a bromine, part of a bromide thing. So you ever heard of carbon dioxide? Well, we got a problem if you haven't. We need to go back to last semester. So what this does, so if when we get a blood gas, what's normal?
35, 45.
3545 or
35 to 45.
535.
Yes. So 40, boom, is the middle of that number, right? But that's just doing the blood, the ABG, the CO2. Now they also get blood, the lab does, and they measure all the serum carbon dioxide. So this is the carbon dioxide that's been diluted into the serum. And when it does that, it has a tendency to bind with amine groups that are part, because you remember the different proteins that are floating around that can help pick up some protons, help pick up some CO2, help pick up some of these items. Well, these are the ones that kind of pick up the CO2 and they measure it. You don't really need no more than that, other than make sure you know this. Because I'm gonna guarantee you, if they do one of these and that says 32, 33, 34, guess what my blood gas is gonna say? 48, 50. Yeah, so if this is high, because I'm gonna tell you, the doctors sometimes, they order a lot of BBGs, because the nurses are getting blood anyway. Why stick a patient? The BBG don't look good, now let's get blood this. But also part of that, they can do this right here. And they're like, you know what? Their serum rate CO2 was normal. Yeah, that's right. But if this is like 30, 36, oh, let's get blood. Because you remember, everything's partial pressures, right? If that's high, that's going to be high. It has to be. Who would this normally be high in and the blood gas be normal? COPD patients, things like that. So you remember how we took sodium and we subtracted everything else from it, ion gap? This is the boys that it can be. There's more than that. This is just some of the culprits that could be. Okay. So here's Raven, you didn't read that, did you? You're the one with the quick eye on those slides. I can't, way too quick eye on the slides. So a 70-year-old male with questionable hypertension and end-stage renal disease. What makes you end-stage renal disease, by the way?
Hyperplasia.
Huh?
Hyperkalemia.
Well, end-stage renal disease.
Oh, end-stage.
So different levels of kidney failure, and you hear people, they're end-stage kidney disease and they're on dialysis. It means the same thing. So once you end up having to get dialysis, you're in end-stage renal failure. On hemodialysis, admitted to the hospital with pneumonia. So you start a nebulizer treatment with albuterol. You notice that the patient's cardiac monitor heart rate is 50. The T waves are tall. QRS is wider. And with the treatment that you gave 4 hours earlier. What does that remind you of?
Hyperkalemia. That's
Right.
kind of slowing down.
Yes. So what should you do with the albuterol treatment? Huh?
Give it.
Makes you think, yes, you guys are getting it, yes. You wanna give it, if anything, it's gonna help. Yeah, it's gonna help, right? It's gonna help. Raven already knew. I appreciate you not saying that, Raven. So we got hyperkalemia going on, so we give the albuterol, push that potassium back into the cell, drop the serum load, right? Very good. Get y'all listening to me. So calcium is another one. Calcium structures substance in the bone and plays an important role. Calcium plays a role in everything. If you're doing something, calcium's involved. Okay? So when you have ups and downs with calcium, it can cause a lot of problems. Where's 99% of your calcium stored?
Bone.
Bingo. Everybody knows that. So it has a lot to do with the cell condition, neuromuscular systems, because you guys remember the little walkie things back and forth when you go to contract, it's all calcium based, remember that? If you don't have calcium, you can't do that. And it plays a massive role in coagulation. Without calcium, you can't clot. So if you didn't have enough calcium, you would literally bleed out, because you cannot clot. I think one of the things on here shows you that whenever they do calcium levels in blood, they'll actually give citrates and things to blood to keep it from clotting, just so they can store it. Okay. So it's, your body does not produce calcium, but you can get absorbed calcium through the bowel and it's excreted through the urine. So you already told me almost all the calcium is held in bone, right? So we have processes that break down bone that release phosphates and calciums into the blood if we need them. So the bones that you have right now, ever since you became an adult, is that the same bones that you had whenever you're old? No. Your bones are constantly tore down, restructured. Okay? And there's a process for that. And we get a lot of phosphate, we get a lot of calcium because of that restructuring. Okay? But without it, that's, just so you know,